Hello everyone. Welcome to Listen to a Book Every Day. I'm Zoe. We just talked about the huge differences in money concepts between Robert Kiyosaki's two fathers and Rich Dad Poor Dad. In fact, these contrasting views are not just theoretical differences, they directly shape how people live their financial lives. Today, let's dig deeper into the two core lessons from Rich Dad that truly changed Robert's fate, and why these seemingly simple truths are still capable of shaking up our financial cognition even today. First, let's revisit that thought-provoking story I mentioned earlier. The English literature PhD who was on the verge of losing her house when Robert suggested she take Asali's job. She blew up thinking it was an insult to her academic background. This reaction is exactly what Rich Dad warned against. Many people are trapped by their own identity, pride, and reject the most practical way to make money. Rich Dad often told Robert, "The poorest people are not those who have no money, but those who look down on money and refuse to learn how to make it." This is closely tied to the first major lesson Rich Dad taught. The rich do not work for money. At first glance, this sounds counterintuitive. Don't we all work to earn money? But Rich Dad meant that the rich never sell their time cheaply for survival money. Instead, they treat work as a way to accumulate skills and build their own money-making system. He used the metaphor of the rat race to describe the predicament of most people. They study hard to find a stable job, work overtime to get a raise, then use the extra money to buy a bigger house or a nicer car only to face higher mortgages, car loans, and taxes. In the end, they have to work even harder to keep up, spinning in place like a mouse in a cage. To pull Robert out of this trap, Rich Dad did a bold experiment. When Robert and his friend were kids, Rich Dad first paid them an hour to do chores. After they got used to it, he suddenly said, "From now on you'll work for free, but I'll teach you a skill for each job, skills that can build a business." At that time, a neighbor offered them $5 an hour to mow the lawn, which was 5 times their original salary. But after hesitating, they refused because they had already set their goal to open a comic book rental shop. This small choice became a turning point. Rich Dad later explained, "When you work for money, you let fear and desire control you. Fear of not paying bills, desire for a better car. But when you work for skills, you become the master of money." Robert later recalled that after this experience, he never looked at a job by its salary alone. Instead, he asked, "Can I learn sales here? Can I understand how a business operates?" This shift in mindset allowed him to accumulate the invisible assets needed to build his own career, rather than being trapped in exchanging time for wages. The second core lesson Rich Dad emphasized is even more fundamental. Learn to distinguish assets from liabilities, and keep buying assets. This is the only rule of financial management, he repeatedly stressed. Yet it's the one most people get wrong. For example, many people think a car or a big house is an asset, but in Rich Dad says, these are typical liabilities. A car requires fuel, maintenance, and insurance. A house with a mortgage means monthly repayments, property fees, and repairs. These things keep taking money out of your pocket. That's a liability. An asset, by contrast, is something that puts money into your pocket automatically, whether you work or not. Rental properties that generate monthly rent, stocks that pay dividends, or a book that earns royalties year after year. Rich Dad often said, "The poor buy liabilities with their salary. The middle class buy liabilities they think are assets. And the rich buy assets first, then use the money from assets to buy liabilities." He gave an example of someone who won the lottery. If they have a poor mindset, they'll buy a luxury car, a big house, and go on expensive trips, all liabilities. Soon, the prize money will be spent, and they'll return to poverty. But if they first buy rental properties or invest in dividend stocks, the assets will generate a steady stream of income. Later, they can use that income to buy luxuries without affecting their core financial structure. This is why Rich Dad hated it when people said I can't afford it. That sentence shuts down all thinking, while how can I afford it forces you to look for ways to earn more or buy assets. For example, when Robert wanted a new bike as a kid, poor dad would say we can't afford it. But Rich Dad would say let's figure out how to make the money. They ended up buying old bikes, fixing them, and selling them, earning enough for the new bike and learning how assets work. You might ask, these ideas sound too simple. Isn't this book outdated? But financial logic never goes out of style. Only specific methods do. Let's look at reality. Why do some people with high salaries still live paycheck to paycheck? Because they confuse liabilities with assets, using their salary to buy a car, a bag, or a house with a huge mortgage, leaving no money to invest. Why do some people with average incomes achieve financial freedom? Because they save money to buy dividend funds or rental properties first, letting assets grow their wealth. Robert wrote in the book, schools teach us to be good employees, but not how to be good bosses or investors. This is the root of the problem. Poor dad, a highly educated educator, never learned to distinguish assets from liabilities. Rich Dad, a high school dropout, mastered this through real-world practice. The book's greatest value is in teaching you to pick stocks or buy houses. It's breaking the poor mindset that making money is vulgar or stable work is everything, and letting you realize financial freedom isn't about earning more, but about building a system where money works for you. Let's summarize the core of Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's not about getting rich overnight, but about changing your relationship with money. First, stop working for money, work for skills that build your business. Second, always distinguish assets from liabilities, and make buying assets a habit. These 2 points sound simple, but practicing them requires overcoming inherent fears and prejudices. Just like Robert said at the end of the book, the biggest obstacle to wealth is not lack of money, but lack of courage to change your mindset. This book has been popular for decades because it does have complicated formulas. It gives a mental map for financial freedom, whether you are a student, an office worker, or a parent. This map can help you avoid the rat race and take control of your financial life. That's all for our sharing of Rich Dad Poor Dad. We've organized the key points in the transcript below. Congratulations on finishing another book. See you next time.